Welcome to the St. Louis Regional Freightways virtual Freight Week STL 2021. I'm Mary Lamy, the Executive Vice President of Multimodal Enterprises, a business enterprise of Bi-State Development. Freight Week STL is in partnership with the Inland Marine Expo hosted in downtown St. Louis. Today is the last day of Freight Week STL, and our panel discussion will focus on the ecosystem of the 60-mile Illinois Route 3 manufacturing and logistics corridor in Southwestern Illinois. First, we'd like to start with thanking our sponsors, starting with our presenting sponsors, Global Gateway Logistics, Burns McDonnell, the Lockmiller Group, Crawford Murphy and Tilley, or CMT, Castle, and then our supporting sponsors, the Hauser Group and the Jerry Costello Group. And then our associate sponsors, SIVA, CAP, Washington University, the Boeing Group, CDI Engineering, and Jefferson County Port Authority. Our moderator for today's session is Doug Rasmussen. He is President and CEO of Steadfast City Economic and Community Partners. Doug is an economic development professional, thought leader, and transactional consultant with more than 20 years of experience in the transportation, logistics, real estate, and economic development industries. He specializes in the negotiation of business and real estate development incentives and corporate site selection. His experience includes the St. Louis Regional Chamber, the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, and a director of incentives and site selection for the global consulting firm Duff & Phelps. He and his firm are advisors to the St. Louis Regional Freightway and will help lead today's discussion. We welcome Doug, our moderator, and our three panelists. As many of you know, the Illinois Department of Transportation announced over $200 million of funding over the last several years for sections of the Route 3 corridor, indicating this is a location for continued growth of the region's global logistics hub and supporting of existing and new companies. It seems we have all of the ingredients with public and private sector support and multimodal infrastructure to continue to make this happen. Doug, I'm going to turn this over to you and have you lead the discussion.
Thank you, Mary. I will have our exciting panel introduce themselves here in a minute, but first some thoughts and stats about the Illinois Route 3 corridor in St. Louis, one of the premier manufacturing logistics corridors in the Midwest. Route 3 is 60 miles of multimodal industrial development and distribution. It's a system of river, rail, runway, and road. It has over 6,000 businesses, or about 100 businesses per mile, 76,000 jobs, $3.5 billion in earnings, and over $12 billion in direct revenue. Its top industries are manufacturing and transportation and warehousing. Each of those industries have over 10,000 workers. Its total economic impact from Jersey County, just north of Alton, to Waterloo on the south is over 221,000 jobs, about $10 billion in earnings, and $16.7 billion in revenue. So it's quite an impressive generator for this region. And we're going to go there now in more depth with three gentlemen who live, work, and breathe it every day. And I'd like to start by having Mike Patton, the general manager of U.S. Steel, introduce himself and introduce his company. Mike?
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that, and glad that you asked for me to be part of the panel. As you mentioned, I am the general manager here at Granite City Works of United States Steel. Been in the business about 33 years myself, and most of it here at Granite City. I'd like to explain a little bit about what we do here at the mill. It really started back in 1895, believe it or not. So we've enjoyed the fruits of the corridor and been part of it for nearly 150 years. Currently, we employ 1,700 employees at this facility. We are an integrated flat roll steel manufacturing facility. We produce about 2 million tons of flat roll steel per year. We service all different industries, but primarily the construction and energy markets, as well as service centers and automotive. We have about 2,000 acres as part of our manufacturing site. We sit just a half mile east of Route 3, and of course, right by the river dock as part of our operations. We ship, obviously, we bring in a lot of material to make our steel, as well as ship all of our product either via rail, barge, or via the road. So glad to be here this morning.
Thank you, Mike. That's fantastic. Why don't we go to Matt Whitney, who's the Director of Business and Industrial Development for the Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis. Matt, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Doug. Matt Whitney with the Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis. I've been with the Terminal Railroad for 22 years in various roles. The Terminal Railroad is a 130-year-old regional short line, 230 full-time employees, 5 Class 1 owners. We also serve 80 local industrial customers, 50 miles of mainline track, and 2 rail bridges crossing the Mississippi River. The largest freight rail river crossing in the U.S. We are second largest rail freight interchange location in the U.S. behind Chicago, and third largest by tonnage behind Kansas City. We have extensive property on both the Illinois and Missouri side of the river. And what makes the terminal unique is our connectivity and our location in the region.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That's fantastic. Appreciate that overview. Finally, last but not least, Steve Zuber, principal of the Barbara Murphy Group. Steve, would you please introduce yourself and your firm?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So the Barbara Murphy Group is a commercial real estate brokerage firm that recently celebrated its 15-year anniversary. We're an Illinois-based firm in Shiloh. We have 18 Illinois licensed brokers, and 5 of them are licensed in Missouri. We have over 500 listings. We service the industrial, investment, land, retail, and office markets. Our firm has consistently been ranked as one of the top 10 commercial real estate firms in the St. Louis metropolitan market by the St. Louis Business Journal. While our core businesses is in Madison, St. Clair, and Monroe County, we cover all of Southern Illinois from Springfield south to the Indiana and Kentucky borders, and we are now moving across the Mississippi River to serve our clients on both sides of the river.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And thanks again, gentlemen, for your introductions. Let's dive in, shall we? Steve, I'm going to start with you. Tell us about your history working brokerage and development-related issues in the Route 3 area. What changes have you seen over time?
Sure. I started in this business 15 years ago, partnering with Wayne Barber on the industrial team. I was one of the first brokers hired by the firm. And Wayne and I have worked the industrial properties from Dupo to Alton along the Route 3 corridor and have seen a significant amount of change in that time. We've handled over 100 plus heavy manufacturing industrial properties and worked in most of the communities. You know, the Route 3 corridor has a long history of heavy industrial businesses operating along its path. And many have considered this area in the past as unsightly, dirty, nasty, contaminated, unsafe, and have thumbed their nose in our direction. You know, I've always seen it as a diamond in the rough. And as I look at the landscape today, you know, I see the majority of these legacy properties have been either demolished, repurposed, or redeveloped. And the region's really starting to sparkle.
Absolutely. Can you give us some examples of some recent investments that show how the region is sparkling?
Sure. If you've been to the former Stockyards area in Fairmont City and East St. Louis recently, you'll notice a lot of activity. Since the new I-70 bridge was built, and it really opened up that area to development. You know, Terminal Railroad recently acquired about 100 acres of ground and is clearing the overgrown area, getting ready for future development. You know, most of the premium ground along Exchange Avenue has been purchased and is home to Newman Carriers, Tank Trailer Cleaning, Aspen Waste, Houseby Truck Sales, Apex Recycling, and others. You know, and 15 years ago, you couldn't give that ground away. Now it's being sold at a premium of $2 per square foot. You know, companies like Bailey Foods, Illinois Electric Works, Quality Rail, Custom Steel have all taken advantage of some of the older legacy buildings and repurposed those buildings for more modern day uses. And you look at America's Central Port, which has invested millions of dollars in the former military base, repurposing old buildings and adding container on barge operations. They're at maximum capacity right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been thank you for that background. It's been a very impressive transformation, as you said. Mm-hmm. Mike, going back to you all have been here, as you alluded to, about 150 years. And so obviously, you know, this location has worked for you for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about how the Mills location along Route 3 has been advantageous for your operations?
Certainly. So as Steve mentioned, real estate's all about location, location, location. And for our manufacturing site, it bodes the same. I had mentioned previously, we're a half mile from Route 3. We have the waterway there and the river docks. Of course, we have Matt and his team with the terminal. We have all the Class 1 railroads that service us. And of course, in the steel industry, which we've been in the steel industry, started as a stamping company by a couple brothers, the Niederhaus brothers, back in the late 1800s. Obviously, many changes since. But one thing that's been fairly constant is we rely heavily on getting product to us as well as shipping our product, and being geographically located in the Midwest, as well as having all of those transportation ways, if you will, has been a huge advantage for this facility, and one of the reasons we're still here.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the Route 3 system is an ecosystem of manufacturing, trucking, distribution, ports, warehouses. What role do you think U.S. Steel plays in that ecosystem? And you mentioned TRRA, Terminal Railroad, and how do you interact with entities like Terminal and others that you rely on for the mill?
We touch the ecosystem in all different means and ways, with producing over 2 million tons of steel annually. Certainly, Matt and his team is able to help us coordinate on a daily basis, getting product into us so that we can turn it from a raw materials into a finished goods. And then they're there along with some other suppliers, as well as the port that Steven mentioned, where we go out and either load product up via barge. Of course, we load a certain percentage of our product via truck, and the majority via the rail. And it's a very competitive environment that brings economies. And certainly, since there is a lot of money wrapped up in the 2 million tons we produce, that's certainly an advantage. And we play a big role in that. And of course, these guys help us be successful as we do it.
Absolutely. So Matt, Whitney, I'm gonna go back to you. Obviously, Mike had mentioned your company as one of its major partners and keys to their success and what they do along Route 3. What role does TRRA play with the various Class 1 railroads in serving businesses like U.S. Steel and others?
Sure, thank you. To pick up where Mike left off there, the rail service along this corridor is unique. That it's what every manufacturer rail shipper would want. You have 6 Class 1 railroads you can ship direct or through the Terminal Railroad. There's 5 intermodal facilities, if not on the corridor, within a 5 to 10 minute drive. And what we do is we're that last mile service provider. So we provide a safe interchange of goods between the Class 1s and their end users. The river and the rail and the interstate access in this area for customers, it really gives them a true multimodal options.
Absolutely. And I think certainly those are key to supporting and growing businesses. From your perspective, from the railroad and serving all these businesses, what are some of the greatest opportunities and challenges for industrial growth that you see along this corridor? Well,
the terminal being 130 years old, starting as a ferry company, we have a lot of historical data. So I go back and I look at our maps back from the early 1900s, and I look at the river and I see the rail, extensive rail. Everyone had rail down to the river 100 years ago. I think people would be amazed if they really saw the Route 3 corridor and how the manufacturing fed down to the river and how the railroad supported that along with the barges. I think the opportunities is to redevelop that along the old stockyards locations that some of the property the Terminal Railroad has purchased. I think getting that stuff site ready. But I also believe some of these challenges are the tax rates are going to be an issue in getting those sites ready to go.
Yeah, for sure. So the private and the public partnerships are certainly key to the continued growth of the corridor. And And I know that's been a theme for sure. I'm sure with many of the companies that have expanded and grown here. Specific to you, Matt, I know your position's relatively new in the company. What role do you see, like, for example, your office having working for the TRRA and redeveloping some of these former sites, some of the sites that Steve had mentioned, things getting repurposed. For example, maybe even the National Stockyard site that you all are now controlling. But do you want to talk a little bit about that and your role in that and how that's evolved within the terminal?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in operations. I've been with the company, like I said, 22 years. Before 2018, we never had an industrial development department on the railroad. We had a real estate department that dealt a lot with easements, with local utility companies and so forth. In 2008, when former president put me on the position, he gave me the task of growing the business, right? So Matt, you need to go out there, grow the new business. I said, all right, Mike. So I looked at some of our old maps and looked around. I said, we're really like a real estate company as well. We have hundreds of acres of property along Route 3. I looked at the old National Stockyard site. We saw that there was 60 acres available for purchase, along with another 30 acres that we currently had. So we decided at that point, let's purchase this stuff. Let's grab this property, have a nice 100 acres along Route 3 for development. Along with that, we looked a mile north. We have a 100-acre farm field that we're currently working with Steve. We need to get that stuff site ready. We need to get that property and really start marketing that property. So I think the Terminal Railroad really kick off this Route 3 corridor to get this property up ready, site ready, and get it marketed.
Absolutely. I think you had mentioned as we were preparing for today's session that you all are looking at maybe even issuing an RFP later this year and on that land. And I'd like to turn it actually back over to Steve as our real estate expert here on the panel. It's always great, I think, to see RFPs out there and to really be soliciting for developers and for end users. And Steve, maybe you could talk to us a little bit and for our audience about what some of the advantages of this corridor are for manufacturers and others who would be investing here from a real estate or for an operating business perspective. Like what would these end users and investors find particularly attractive with, let's say, this RFP or this land that is being assembled for redevelopment?
Sure. So first of all, the Route 3 corridor from Dupo to Alton has some very favorable zoning ordinances in communities that are going to welcome heavy manufacturing. The Route 3 arterial route, which is a 4-lane highway, is relatively uncongested, and it traverses parallel to the Mississippi River. It intersects multiple interstates, rail, and river access points. It has access to heavy utilities and a skilled labor pool. And many of these communities are relatively easy to work with and don't have a lot of red tape to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. It says there's nothing better than a welcoming environment to effectuate in a redevelopment deal or a business development deal and a site selection project. And some of my own personal experience as well in that role, we found this corridor to be very business friendly to those types of entities. And personally, we've worked on projects, let's say at the Mid-America's Port and other locations, and so we know that's certainly true. Steve, maybe put your crystal ball in front of us all here for a minute. So, you mentioned it, earlier in this conversation about the last 15 years, you've seen all this sort of re-energizing and repurposing and taking these old heavy sites and for modern industry and all that. I mean, what do you kind of see in terms of potential future growth along this corridor? If we're interviewing you 5 years from now, what would you predict you'd be saying?
Well, right now there's a lot of activity in this market for rail serve sites, and as we said, Terminal Railroad is going to be a key driver, as it has control over a significant amount of the ground in East St. Louis, Venice, and Madison communities. As Matt said, they're in the process of making that ground available for development and are taking a closer look at how they can utilize these assets to drive their own rail business. we're getting more calls coming in from people looking for sites. The Missouri industrial brokerage community is becoming more active in this market. I'm seeing many sites that have been sitting idle and overgrown now being cleared and prepped for industrial purposes. And, as the creek continues to go along I-44 and 70 and Missouri and just keeps heading further west, we're sitting on an abundance of available land. And I think we're primed for some real improvements in the next few years.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about the location and the infrastructure alone, this is just a fantastic location for site selection and new business investment. So just thinking about that, I want to kind of go back to Mike here for a minute because, I think it's an interesting sort of juxtaposition a little bit with all this new growth and different things changing. Certainly, I would imagine, Mike, things have changed a little bit. In your 150 years, you're not exactly doing today what you started out doing. I think it's always exciting to hear of an industry like yours that continues to reinvent itself, continues to come up with new things, and obviously that means great things for obviously the city of Granite City and your workers and the region. And for St. Louis in general, being a large mill, a large manufacturer, I'm sure there's lots of spin-off impacts that you all have. Maybe talk a little bit about some of your supplier or business expansions that you're aware of, your operations and investments that have occurred around Route 3 with other industries or supporting industries. Are there other partners that you'd like to talk about?
I would. And it's grown over the years and it continues. We continue to find advantages. And to the other guys' points about the land that's available and the repurposing. And we've been part of that with our vendors, suppliers. We right on Route 3, they're here because they also enjoy the advantage of what we're talking about with the infrastructure. We have a tremendous labor pool, obviously a really long history, really good skilled labor. So that's certainly an advantage. I can only see that, further development in that as we continue to grow and evolve, that people will have land to build on and hopefully process some of our steel and help us be successful into the future.
Absolutely. Matt, let's go back to you a little bit more about the railroad. I mean, I think the rail is obviously a consistent theme here in today's discussion. And again, going back to our ecosystem and thinking about this from a diverse ecosystem and a site selection point of view, tell us a little bit more about the types of commodities that you see moving through your railroad system, either on the terminal or with some of your barge operators that you work with or the other Class 1 railroads that you support.
Absolutely. I get this question a lot, not only from family and friends. To add to what Mike had to say, the scrap industry. We support 6 or 7 scrap industry customers here locally in St. Louis. We see a wide array of materials, salt, the scrap metal rebar, fertilizer, but the number one commodity would be the ag industry, the soybeans and the corn exporting from rail to barge.
Absolutely. And are you those industries, I'm sure, are all present along the river, present within the greater metro area, and that's where you're seeing that source, or are they coming from all over?
Correct, all over, and there's room to expand on the river as well. I mean, I think that's important, and we've had customers approach us about expanding. Also, I need to touch on, Mike talked about the automotive industry. We support Wentzville. A lot of auto parts moving through the St. Louis, through the region, not only for GM, but for Ford. And we've also had some interest here in the last 6 months to do some development with manufacturers and shippers that support GM Wentzville. So we're really excited about that. And hopefully we can work with Steve and get something figured out with these farm fields that help support this automotive industry.
Absolutely. Well, GM Wentzville is a topic that we'll be addressing in actually a different Freight Week panel, and what a success story that has been. And it's interesting to hear that their $1.5 billion investment, which is the largest private investment in the state of Missouri has ever had. It's nice to see that and learn, because I wasn't aware of that till you just said this, that you all are involved or potentially involved in some of those successes, because obviously if they do well, everyone does well, and you all are part of moving commodities into that plant and making sure that they have the operations they need too. So it's certainly even a bigger ecosystem beyond Route 3, although it's centered in Route 3 from this perspective. So that's great. That's really interesting. How about we've heard a lot about the positives and the upsides. I mean, certainly we touched a little bit, I think, here on impediments and challenges. Are there any? Maybe Steve Zuber, I'll go back to you. You've been working this area for a long time. You've seen a lot of it, grow and succeed. What else would you recommend? To kind of continue to foster that growth in the corridor and maybe overcome any challenges that might be there.
So Doug, this region, as we all would agree, has a lot of potential, but there are some challenges to being historically underserved in some of these communities because of some of this, these issues with higher property taxes and revenue streams have decreased due to declines in population of residential property values. This can become a vicious cycle. And if proactive steps are not taken to reverse these trends, we're just going to continue to see problems. We have to incentivize new development and create a larger tax base, alleviating the pressure to raise property taxes. Programs like the River's Edge Development Zone are a good start, but are only available in certain communities in Illinois and should be expanded to serve, more communities. Leadership at the local level is also important to make lasting positive changes. I'm encouraged with the consolidation of Cahokia, Centerville, and Allerton into Cahokia Heights. And I see that as a positive step for the region. People in these communities are demanding a positive change, and that's where it really has to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've always been impressed in my own career with the can-do attitude in Southwestern Illinois and along this Route 3 corridor. And Steve, I know we'd had some conversations recently about this, and you mentioned, expansions of River's Edge and things like that, and what sort of things can be done from a policy perspective. And, getting community input is clearly a key driver, in terms of its success. And along this 60-mile corridor, which is, like we said, a significant corridor. Well, that's great. I think, we've had a wonderful conversation here today. If I were to just kind of recap what we've heard, I mean, I think we've started by saying that, with Steve, with you saying that, hey, there's been this kind of redevelopment, this transformation or repurposing of many of the old industrial assets and the new modern businesses. And a lot of that has been, like you said, making the region sparkle. It's creating new demand, and we're seeing that demand being serviced with the help of Terminal Railroad, with not only how they serve industry and how they serve U.S. Steel, but also with proactively taking steps to develop rail serve sites, which is a fantastic idea, and I think a tremendous asset for the St. Louis region and for the continued growth of this sector. Mike, with your comments about the steel mill and U.S. Steel and its long-term presence, I mean, clearly, a business being in a location for about 150 years, there's certainly some locational attributes, both from a logistics and also a workforce perspective, that allow you all to keep innovating, allow you all to keep, being successful in this market. And so great to hear, some of the things that you all are working on. Very interested as well to hear about some of the spinoff and some of the supporting companies and certainly the impact that you all are having, both in the Route 3 corridor and even now, as you mentioned, and as Matt mentioned, through the automotive industry in this region and other industries. So, from our view as site selectors, I mean, we are always looking for vibrant corridors, vibrant industrial corridors. We are always looking for business-friendly communities. Steve, you'd mentioned, that this is a manufacturing-friendly corridor, and I think, whenever a business is looking to expand, having those basics and those fundamentals in place, as well as the economic development package and incentives and the public-private partnerships. I mean, clearly that's a key to continue driving and continue growth here, even over and above what's already occurred. So I think the future, as you said, Steve, does look bright, and I think I'm very excited to learn more from the three of you who operate in the Route 3 corridor every day about what you're seeing, and I'm sure our audience is as well. Mary, with that, I think I can turn this back over to you and for any closing comments that you might have.
Excellent job, Doug. That was fantastic. And thanks to our panelists, Steve, Mike, and Matt. Thanks for your time today and sharing your insight regarding the region's freight market, the historic development of manufacturing along the Illinois Route 3 corridor, and its true impact from a local and national level. We'd also like to thank our sponsors one last time. In addition to today's event, the St. Louis Regional Industrial Real Estate Market Report was released, and we encourage our audience to take advantage of this information as well as other information released during the last 4 days of Freight Week STL 2021. This officially concludes Freight Week STL, and we appreciate the support from all of our participants, the Freight Development, the Freight Marketing Committee, the Bi-State Development Team, along with our many consultants. We hope all of our viewers have gained insight on new ways to make national and global freight movements more efficient, and from our logistics experts and forward thinkers have a better understanding of the nation's manufacturing and logistics industries. We encourage all of you to share this information from our Freight Week STL social media platforms, our press releases, and visit our website at thefreightway.com.